Hi guys, welcome back. Next up we have Jon Schlossberg. He's going to be talking about his talk is entitled Websites Are Products Too, so please give him a big hand.
Thank you. Hats off to Mike for trying to pronounce my last name. Websites are products too. It's kind of an interesting sentence. Let's dive into what that actually means. Is a website a product? And I guess the answer to this question sort of depends on how you think about products, what products actually are. In the real world, to most companies, a product it's anything that you make that people will give you money for. So you put time into making something, people will give you their dollars for it. You've got yourself a product, right? But I think everyone here would agree that great products are not just about making money. They're not just about being really slim or really sexy or really powerful. Those things certainly help. They help you get to a great product. But at the end of the day, great products are about something more than that. So hold that thought for a second. This is where I work. I work at Huge over in Brooklyn, just across the East River. And we have offices all over the world, but one thing we really try to stay true to is thinking about websites like products, like any other product you'd find on a store shelf. These are some of the people we do that for. Companies like CNN and Samsung and JetBlue, and these are big names, sure, but what we really get excited about are the big challenges that these companies bring to us, these actual business goals. These are companies, Fortune 100 companies, trying to actually make money, and that's their priority, right? And we try to attack their business challenges with products that you just happen to use online. So I've said products maybe like 20 times, and I've been up here for like 50 seconds. Clearly I'm all about products. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because great products are great experiences. Great products are about the experiences that they enable real people to have. They're about the value that they add to real people's lives, right? Let's look at this example. This is a kitchen mixer designed by Dieter Rams, arguably the greatest designer of all time in any discipline. Now, think about what the average person would think of this kitchen mixer. They might agree that it's well designed. And maybe they actually do care about that. Maybe when they're standing in Target or wherever you buy a kitchen mixer and they're trying to make a decision, maybe they'll pick the well-designed one. But when they get it into their kitchen, I'm sorry about the mic, this thing is rubbing up on my face. When they get it into the kitchen, do you think they, oh man, do you think they care about how well designed it is? And it is well designed. It's masterfully designed, right? This guy knows what he's doing. But what the real person actually cares about is this. They have to care about not worrying about another complicated kitchen appliance, so that they can focus on what really matters to them, which in this case is cleaning tuna fish off that baby's hands or whatever that is. They don't care about the masterful purity of its design. They care about the experiences that product enables them to have. So how does this apply to websites? Does this apply to websites? Well, just like a website, or just like a product, sorry, just like a product, websites can make you money, right? So they fit the definition, so to speak. But also just like a product, a website, your website doesn't mean diddly squat if it doesn't enable real people to actually do something they care about. That's what this is all about. Great products are great experiences, and so are great websites. Great products enable great experiences, and so do great websites. Let's look at these. These are 6 of the top 10 websites in America by traffic. Think about these websites. I'm sure you use them every day. Think about Facebook or Amazon. These are not really well-designed websites, but they're pretty awesome websites, right? Because they add value to your life. You use them because you can post your pics on Facebook, and everyone in your life can see them. You use Amazon because you get that box at your door 2 to 3 days later, and you don't have to worry about it. That's real value. The design of the website sort of doesn't really matter at that point. So let's go back to Dieter Rams. how would an industrial designer like Dieter Rams, a guy who clearly knows a thing or two about designing great experiences, take the kitchen mixer, how would he design a website? I don't actually know the answer to this question, but I can tell you how he would design a product. And that's by iterating it repeatedly until he's satisfied with every last detail. That really is the product design process, iterating it repeatedly until he's satisfied with every detail. That takes time. So that's the product design process. And another product designer, a really awesome guy by the name of David Kelly, founded a company called IDEO, one of the preeminent product design companies in the world. And David Kelly says, this: enlightened trial and error outperforms the planning of flawless execution. This is product design. Not planning for flawless execution, but iterating repeatedly, enlightened trial and error. Why is this important? This is how industrial designers approach designing products, real stick them on the store shelf products. But here's what I'm going to try to convince you of. Thinking about a product design, thinking like a product designer, and using enlightened trial and error will make better websites. It may even make great websites. So in other words, websites are products too. And adapting how you design your websites, adapting your process just a little to be more like David Kelly, to be more like Dieter Rams, will enable you to make better websites. So let's start with the convincing. I'd like to start by showing you a clip from Objectified, fantastic documentary by Gary Huswit. He was super kind to let me show you a clip from it. And let's just dive right into the clip.
It's actually things I haven't seen in 1,000 years.
We try to use less material. Like here's one that's hollow inside. You know, a good friend of mine, Sam Farber, he was vacationing with his wife, Betsy. I got a phone call one night. He was so excited, he said he couldn't sleep. And what he was excited about is he had been cooking dinner with Betsy, and she was making an apple tart. And she was complaining about the peeler, that it was hurting her hands. And she had arthritis, and she just couldn't hang on to it. And it hit Sam at that moment that here's a product that nobody's really thought about.
And our thought was, well, if we can make it work for people with arthritis, it could be good for everybody.
And we knew that it had to be a bigger handle. You know, kids have big crayons because they're easier to hold on to. It's the same thing for somebody that might not have full mobility of their hand. They need something a little bit larger that's a little easier to grip with a little bit less force. So we did a lot of studies around the shape of the handle, the size of it, to come up with that size that would be perfect for everybody.
But eventually we found a rubberized bicycle grip, and we basically did this. So it really goes through many, many more iterations than you would think to do a handle that's relatively simple in the end.
So thinking about that clip, think about what they started with, right? They started with a metal peeler. Didn't have a grip on it at all. So any grip that they add to it is going to be a huge win. It's going to be a huge improvement. It will sell like hotcakes, right? And yet they still spent a year, a full year, designing close to 100 prototypes of a rubber grip. A really simple thing. Why did they do that? I think it's because it's about feel. It's about feel, right? It's about the way that rubber grip would feel in Betsy's hand when she's making the apple tart. It's all about feel. It starts and ends with feel. And I think that makes sense. You're literally holding it in your hand. It's really important when you're using that product. Well, here's the thing. Websites have feel too. And sure, we're talking about two slightly different types of feel. There's normal feel, somatosensory feel, which is you actually feeling something on your skin. That's what you get when you use a vegetable peeler. But websites have feel too. It's a different type of feel, it's emotional feel. And emotional feel is something that you get anytime you use anything, in real life or on the internet. you use something, and what you're using gives you feedback, and you react to that feedback. And if that feedback matches your expectations, maybe even exceeds your expectations, it'll feel nice to use. And the more times you can get that feedback, the more instances of that feedback, maybe by really focusing on the details of the thing you're interacting with, it's going to feel nicer and nicer and nicer to use. In fact, Charles Eames, one of the greatest designers of the 20th century, says this: the details are not details. They make the product. Because that's where the feel comes from. The feel that you get when you use stuff comes from details. Because unfortunately for us web designers, our users are used to using stuff in real life. And stuff in real life is inherently detailed, right? Because you can pick it up, you can turn it around, you can look really closely at it, you get to see all those details and you get to react to them. So as web designers, it behooves us to bring that detail onto the web. We simply have to. I mean, think about it this way. Can you imagine selling something that you use with your hands? It's designed to use with your hands. Can you imagine selling it without feeling how it feels in your hands? How about how it works in your hands? I don't think you can imagine doing that. That would be silly. But this happens all the time in web design. Before we get there, let me show you this. This is a pine cone as a peeler for, a handle for a vegetable peeler. It's a pine cone. I know this is ridiculous. And I know that you all know this is ridiculous, but that's because we both know what a pine cone feels like in your hands, right? So just bear with me. Imagine you don't know what a pine cone feels like. Imagine you're a product designer, and you're struggling. You're trying to design a grip, but you need some inspiration. So you do what any designer does. You go on Google image search, and you look at a bunch of different things, and you stumble across this image of a pine cone. And you get really excited, because it's something you've never seen before. So you do a little more digging, and you get pumped, because this is something that no one else is doing. It's environmentally friendly. It's sustainable. It's definitely got structure to it. It smells like forests. It's definitely got a grip. You know it'll make a good grip by the way you look at it. So you start making a pine cone as your peeler handle. You really think you've got something special here. And all of that would be fine as long as you prototyped it, right? And you would immediately realize how dumb you are. You'd get it in your hand and it would feel terrible. This would make a terrible, terrible vegetable peeler handle. But what if you didn't prototype it? Stupid question, right? Then why would you do that with a website? Why would you do this with a website? Why would you launch something that you haven't had the chance to feel the way your users will feel it? I mean, do you want your users to look like this guy? Why would you ship something you use in a browser without first using it in a browser? I hope this sounds silly. Maybe even stupid. But like I said, this happens every day in web design. I work at an agency, and we've sort of gotten a pretty good reputation lately, but we do this all the time. We ship stuff without prototyping. So you've got to feel it the way your users will feel it. And when it comes to feel, there's something that's really important. When it comes to feel, you've got to stop talking and start making. Don't get me wrong. Intelligent debate is without a doubt one of the most important parts of the design process, right? Almost everything I've personally ever done has derived from good conversation with really smart people. Talking is super important, but when you get right down to it, when you start talking about features that are all about the way they feel in the browser, you've got to stop talking about those features and start making them. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've won exhausting arguments with my colleagues over a specific feature. And I'm really proud because I beat the creative director. And then later on, I go to build that feature, and I realize almost instantly that it's a total turd. It's so embarrassing. It happens all the time because I didn't prototype. I didn't stop talking and start making. Now, this is super easy for me to say, right? It's easy for me to stand up here and say this. It's another thing to actually do it in real life. It's hard. It's hard to stop talking and start making. Here's 4 reasons why. Process. but you've got to learn when to ignore it. At Huge, we use what's called waterfall process, and some of you may be familiar with this. Basically what that means is planning leads to interaction design, leads to visual design, leads to technology actually building the website. And for really big projects like CNN.com and Reuters.com, this works really well because it allows people to focus on what they do best. This is how a general, like an army general, would plan a really big project because he needs to be able to manage things at a high level. He needs people focusing on what they do best. But there are times when that general needs to rely on his soldiers to take initiative in the field. He needs to rely on that. And what that means for us is knowing when to ignore the process and start making right there. Process is a big deal, but you've got to learn when to ignore it. And then there's deadlines. But if you don't prototype, it'll just take longer to fix later. I'll tell you what does take a long time. Getting changes made to your designs, to your websites, even simple ones, when you're so far along in the process that you've already sent everything to the client, they're really happy with it, they've signed off on everything, and any changes you make now will not only really confuse them, I know because I've done this, they really confuse the client and then earn the wrath of the web developers that you're working with because they've already started building what you thought was a good idea before you decided to move forward without prototyping. Deadlines are there, but it'll just take longer to fix later if you end up making a mistake. How about skills? This is probably a pretty controversial thing for me to say, but I am of the opinion that you have to learn the right ones. You have to. Web design is ultimately our craft. And just like a furniture maker, a furniture maker would have to know how to work with wood, right? Could you imagine a furniture designer not understanding the implications of building things out of wood, not understanding the manufacturing restrictions, not understanding how things need to be cut and put together? I think you could imagine that that would probably make for a pretty bad table designer. Well, the same thing applies to web design. Web design is our craft. We have to know at least the basics of how to build things. And that's really all you need. You need an understanding of basic HTML, basic CSS, and in some instances, basic JavaScript. You've got to learn the right skills. How about budget? I struggled for a while over whether to even include this slide because I don't want to suggest that you should ignore budgets. I understand that people are running businesses. This is about livelihood. You've got to make money, right? Well, in the end, I decided to tell you guys about this anyway because I actually feel that this may be one of the most important things that I'll talk about today. One of the only things that I actually care about, really care about, as a human being is making great things. And this has sort of become trite lately, but I do actually believe this. And when it comes to making great things, a lot of times everything else is secondary. Money is great. I'm a big fan of it. Don't get me wrong. But if your primary interest in being a designer, a web designer, is making money, then come talk to me afterwards and I can point you to a few professions that will probably serve you better. I mean, you can make more money doing other things. But what we get to do as a designer is the opportunities to make great things for a living. I think that's pretty great. And I'll be entirely upfront about this. Stopping your process and spending time prototyping things will cause you to probably spend hours that you can't bill to your clients. So in other words, it will lose you money. But let me just make this point. If you stop talking and start making, your finished product will probably be better. It may even be great. And if you get to the point where you really feel like you're making great things and you're really psyched about going to work every day, well, that's probably going to get you more satisfaction from your life than money ever will. So budget, smudge it. Now, I think this is the point in my talk where you guys are really skeptical. Because I've just ran you through 4 really good reasons why prototyping is hard. It's really hard to do. And you're probably doing pretty okay right now without prototyping. I'm sure you want me to prove to you that it's worth it. This guy's so hipster, I just couldn't resist, I'm sorry. So I admit all of that. It's really hard to do. And in a second, I'll show you some prototypes that we did at Huge that really saved our asses. Really saved us from big embarrassments. There are a number of reasons why it's really good to prototype, other than saving your ass, and other than feel, which I just spent like 10 minutes talking about. So let me run through those really quick before I show you prototypes. The first one is just show them. I'm sure we all know how difficult it can be to explain things to clients. So why not just show them? A prototype really is worth 1,000 PSDs. Because if they can use it the way that your users will be using it, they'll understand. And another one is that you need empathy. We all need empathy. I can't stress enough how important empathy is to any team, let alone web design. But especially in web design, when you have people with very different backgrounds and disciplines, designers and software engineers working together, you really need the empathy. Otherwise, as a designer, you won't care about the realistic implications of what you're designing. You won't care about how it needs to work. And developers won't care about the craft and the thought that you put into every pixel. Empathy is really important. And lastly, you will fail. I spent a good number of hours in usability studies. We do a lot of usability studies at Huge. And inevitably, you always watch the work that you're doing fail at something. It inevitably fails at something. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Because you're going to fail. Obviously, the goal of becoming a better designer is to fail less. But still, even the best designers fail a lot. And you're going to either make those mistakes with your live website, and your users will be pissed off, and they'll never come back. Or you'll make them with the prototype, and your test subjects will be pissed off, and you hand them a $10 Starbucks gift card, and they go home really happy. I think the latter is preferable. So if you prototype, you have the opportunity to fail earlier, to learn from your mistakes, to iterate on the product. And that's the product design process. So let me show you some prototypes. I've got to get out of this presentation here. See if I can drag this window. It's a little small. It's, I guess they set the resolution kind of low. So this is a prototype we did for CNN, a site we launched last year. And we were super happy about it. And the results from CNN.com, one of the biggest things for us is that it really drove up video views by astronomical numbers. And what we did with this prototype, if I click here into a video page, is you see this? Just moved the article text right out of the way. And what's interesting about this prototype is that when we were talking about this, when we were talking at Huge about doing this, the technology team came back to us and they said, this is not possible. We can't do this. And they didn't mean this is not possible at all, period. They meant we can't do this within the constraints of our budget and our timeline and our process. It's just not possible. But one really awesome designer sat down and spent a few nights figuring it out. And once he did that, we showed it to the client. And they fell in love with this animation because it just felt right. And after CNN, the client was in love with it. I mean, things like budget and process didn't matter. They wanted it on their website. And this accessibility to the video content on the article page has driven up video play significantly. It's been a huge deal for them. If we hadn't prototyped it, if we hadn't shown it to the client, it absolutely, unequivocally would not have made it into the final design. How about Samsung? So, show of hands, who here uses compare tools when shopping for things online? That's actually more than I expected, I have to say. We did a lot of research about this when we were redesigning Samsung.com. And what our research sort of told us is that nobody uses compare tools online. And that's because compare tools online suck. They're terrible. They're all really different, right? And they all got the little checkboxes, and then the compare button is in a different place on every website. And then when you actually get to the compare mode, it sort of shows you a spit out of specs. And if you know what you're shopping for, maybe that's helpful. But on Samsung, they sell a lot of TVs. I don't know shit about TVs, so it's not helpful to me at all. Well, when we were redesigning Samsung.com, we sort of knew we had to reevaluate how Compare works. And we were talking about it for a long time, whether we should invest the resources in doing a new Compare tool. And the client had no opinion because they didn't really know what we were talking about. But eventually, we decided to make a prototype. And this is what we ended up with. It's a prototype of a TV category page, and you've got this Compare tool button right here. I click that, and it changes. You can't really see it that well. I'll do that again because of the resolution. It changes the whole page, fades everything else out, and just shows you the products. And now you can really easily add them, and then get a nice Compare view. So I was actually really nervous about this because we took it into usability testing. And this is a design that does two things that you absolutely never want to do when you're working with a shopping experience. The first thing is that it takes people out of the flow of shopping. That is an absolute no-no. If I had suggested this to one of the partners at Huge, he probably would have fired me. But we took it into usability testing, and people loved it. They loved that it actually showed you what was different. That when you mouse over these things, I have no idea what this is, but it tells me. It tells me what the difference is. It tells me about the contrast ratio. It shows me what's similar. And all that's nice. Like, it's nice to see people like what you do, right? But what was way, way, way more important was what people didn't like. And what they didn't like was that you couldn't buy from this page. You can't buy any of the TVs. And when people said this, I was so embarrassed, right? Samsung.com, ultimately they want to sell TVs. And we forgot to put a buy button on the Compare mode. This was a huge failure. But because we prototyped it, we could usability test. And because we usability tested, users told us that we had this huge gaping hole in the design of the website. I mean, can you imagine if we launched Samsung.com without a buy button in the Compare tool? I don't even want to know what would happen if we did that. But because we prototyped, we caught our mistake. We failed. We were able to iterate on the product. So that's Samsung. Sort of running a little bit over, so I want to speed up and show you what it takes to actually make real prototypes. And 3 steps. The first one is be shitty. This is really hard. This is the hardest part of making a prototype, to be shitty. To forget everything you've ever learned about being a good designer. Because prototypes are not about polish. They're not really about making things fast or really semantic code. They're about getting something done right away so you can feel it, so you can show it to the client, so you can take it into a usability test, so you can have empathy with your developers. You've got to learn this. It's really hard. It takes practice. But if you can be shitty, you'll be able to make good prototypes. Next thing is focus. You've got to focus on what you're prototyping. The hard part of prototyping is not what you build, but what you don't. It's about what you don't build. This is something one of the partners at Huge told me. 80 use 20. He actually told me I didn't need to tell you this because he said everyone knows this. But I didn't know this, so I was hoping maybe I wouldn't be alone. 80% of your users use 20% of your features. So focus on that 20%. Really try to get the feel of that 20%. Forget about everything else. Everything else. It doesn't matter. This is a prototype, and you've got to be shitty. And once you can do that, you've got to worry about fidelity. So you have to figure out what type of fidelity you build it in. Here's 3 different types, right? From left to right, sketching, wireframes, visual design. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing that matters when choosing a fidelity is how much time you have. If you have enough time, you want to be over there on the right. You want to be in visual design because that's what the product is. That's the way users will feel and experience your product, in the visual design. But prototyping is so important that if you don't have the time, you can do wireframes. You can do sketches because that's much better than nothing. It's only a matter of time. And once you get there, you've got to start making. You've got to remember to be shitty. You've got to stay focused on what you don't need to build. And then you've got to choose a fidelity. Because it's time to start making it in HTML. There's a number of other ways to prototype. A lot of them have become really popular on the internet now. But I really don't care. The only way that I think you should be prototyping is in HTML. Why? Because great products are great experiences. Because we're thinking of websites like products. And a large part of how good a product is what it's made out of. I mean, think about the iPhone 4. Part of what makes it so awesome is the way, how solid it feels in your hand. It just feels like you're using an awesome piece of technology, right? The same is true for your websites. What your websites are made out of are a huge part of how users use the website. So because of that, I think you've got to prototype in the way your website will be built. And in most cases, that's going to be HTML, it's going to be CSS, it's going to be JavaScript. If it's Flash, prototype in Flash. But a lot of times it's not. So you've got to focus on HTML. Here's some of the other ways to prototype. There's Keynote. It's gotten really popular. There's Flash, like I said. There's Paper. There's sort of like a cult phenomenon around paper prototyping now. There's Balsamic Mockups, which is actually a great piece of software. It allows you to really quickly iterate and then hooks into collaboration tools and you can share with your team. But HTML is our craft. You gotta build it. It's a big part of what websites are made out of. So if you can do HTML, if you can do your prototypes in HTML, it will help you get more iterations on your product. It'll help you get a better website when you finally hand it off to your clients. So before I leave you, I want to sort of take you through a little bit of an anecdote. When I started preparing for this talk, I did about 3 months ago because I'm really bad at procrastinating, so I really wanted to get a big head start. And I started doing a lot of work, right? Like I was researching things, I was photoshopping slides, I was gathering quotes, I was putting everything together, I was writing the script. And then about 3 weeks ago, I thought I was done. And I was really satisfied with the product that I had made. So I showed it to my girlfriend. And she took a look at it, and she sort of made a face at me. And she was like, "Why aren't you using this the way it was meant to be used? Why aren't you using the product design process to make your presentation about the product design process?" And I didn't really know how to respond to that. So my first instinct was to be like, well, I'll just give you the presentation. We'll see how that goes, right? And then I did. And it was twice as long as it needed to be. It was boring. It was repetitive. It had no flow. It was a terrible presentation. And I think this is why. Because I planned for flawless execution. I spent 3 months doing that. But all that while, I didn't use my presentation the way it was meant to be used. In reality, even really smart people don't know what they're doing until they're doing it. I didn't know how giving a presentation would be until I was speaking it out loud. So I did that. Over the next 3 weeks, I would do a little bit of the presentation, speak it out loud, iterate on it, really get it to where I was happy with every detail, and then move on. And over that time, after iterating and iterating and iterating, I think I ended up with something that at least was way better than what I started with. So I hope you do that too. I hope you don't be like me. Use the product design process in everything that you make, and it'll help you make better things. Thanks.
Hey, are you up for taking questions? Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks, John. That's great. So, John's available for some questions if anyone's got any. Anyone? Over there?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to time. If we have time, I would love to be able to involve the client earlier on because it really makes them feel like they're part of the design process. And the fastest you can do that, the better. But like I said, there's a number of reasons why it's really hard to actually prototype. So what that usually means is you don't have much time. But yeah, definitely, if you can do that, for sure. Yes? So you're a developer? So I think you were at a very interesting position in the workflow, right? You were at the crux of it, because ultimately you're the one making the website. So you sort of have an opportunity to be the arbiter of the product. Obviously you have time constraints too, but you can feel how your users will feel it when you're actually building it in HTML and CSS. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're being critical, if you're thinking critically about what you're building, and you can make changes, because in all likelihood, the wireframers aren't going to notice, because they're really busy with other things. So you can improve the product as you're building it. That's really what it's all about. Yes? Yes. I think one of the biggest secrets of working at a big agency is that we're always over budget. There are no exceptions to that rule. It's just, ultimately we want to make great things, so we're willing to accept that margin, right? I think part of that is spending long hours. Like, it's very rare that I will have the opportunity to prototype something during the day, because I'm busy doing other things. But you've just got to put in the work. That's really all it amounts to. And then let the project managers or the engagement directors or whoever is dealing with the money, let them worry about that. Yeah.
So the two examples that you showed were about specific functionality or user experience. How would you look at the entire site as a product? Does that change the way in which you do prototype?
I think it can. I think entire site prototypes take a really long time, right? Because building a site takes a lot of work, so building a prototype of an entire site will also take a lot of work. So it's rare that we do that. I do think it's always about what you don't build, so there are very few instances where you need to build a full prototype of the entire site. Like that CNN prototype that I showed looked like the entire site, but really it was only 2 pages. And anything else you click on takes you to a, what would you expect to be here page, which is a really good question to ask users in usability testing. I'm not sure if I actually answered your question, but yes. Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. Huge is starting to get there. They hired me to do mostly prototyping. I'm a product designer there, one of only 3 product designers, and it's a 300-person company. But what that means is I do lots of other things because we're resource-strapped, like any company is. So it's rare that I'm able to actually do what they hired me to do. But I wish it wasn't. Yeah, back there.
You mentioned how ultimately you want your prototype to be in HTML. Is that where designers often don't have that kind of technical skills? Is it like you were saying where they sit down with a developer and explain what they wanted to have somebody who can build it? Or is it where you're saying that
I think you need to know a little bit. Those prototypes that I showed you are not they're very basic HTML, like absolute positioned elements on top of a background JPEG, and that's it. Obviously, with that animation, there's some fancy stuff going on because he needed to prove that it could work technically, but that is rare. Usually, we're just stringing pages together so we can see how it feels. But I do think you need to learn basic HTML and CSS. There's other types of prototypes. One thing that you described was sitting down with a developer. My friend Dan Mall, who's going to be speaking in a little bit, tells me all the time about how he does prototypes in Flash when he's trying to make animations. Simply because it's easier for him to do it in Flash, and then he doesn't have to sit down with the developer and explain things. He can just show them, and then they can do it in HTML. So it really does depend on the situation. Yeah.
Most prototypes you showed were pretty polished. They were pretty close to the final product.
No, they weren't.
No?
If you look at Samsung.com now, it is very different.
Right. But I mean, typically in our industry, we'll just have like outline wireframes. I mean, so is there ever a danger of like showing something that's overly designed to a client, so that the client may end up getting like might dislike a graphic treatment?
Definitely. There definitely is. And that's something you really have to feel in the client relationship. A lot of clients love looking at wireframes because it makes them feel involved in the design process. A lot of other clients get scared by them. So it really does depend. And if you've got a good enough relationship with the client where you can say, hey, this is not final visual design. We're just trying to see how it feels here. If you can do that, then yeah, it's not so risky. But with other clients, it will be. And you really have to rely on the client, the person managing that client relationship, to feel that out. Yes? Sometimes I wish we did that. So there are certainly people I could point you to. We have a user research group that focuses on recruiting and then running the studies. They really try to pull from a varied group of people. It's difficult when we live in New York City and people in New York City are sort of unlike people anywhere else in America. But there are ways you can use usability tests purely online. There's a number of systems I could tell you about. But yeah, it very much depends on what you're prototyping and what the demographic of the client is. For someone like CNN, it's everyone. So we try to get everyone. But for like Samsung, for televisions, they're really looking at like 20 to 32-year-old males. So that's what we try to go after. Anything else? Great. Thanks, guys.
That's okay. Well done. Okay, thanks, guys. There's a short sort of a break now. It's not the actual break yet, but there's another 15 minutes or so to go on track 1. So you could either just hang out in the area outside, or go over to track 1. There should definitely be enough seating for everyone in track 1. So make sure if you go over there, you can access it from upstairs as well as the main entrance down there. And we're back in here at 3:10. Cheers.